We all know that pesticides are harming our health and the environment, and that relying on fertilizers made from fossil fuels is unsustainable. So, why is only 2% of Scottish farmland organic? Meanwhile, in Austria, more than 30% of farmland is organic. So, what can we learn from our European friends? I'm delighted to invite two experienced organic farmers to discuss this. Thomas Wade is a Green MEP for Austria, and David McKay is a co-director of the Scottish Soil Association. Welcome, gentlemen. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Thomas, for joining us today. As Sam says, we can have hopefully an interesting discussion today about organic farming. We're very keen to hear from Thomas about the experience in Austria and how that might reflect on what's happening here in Scotland. We have a Scottish Government commitment to double the area of land under organic farming, but as Sam says, it's coming from a very low base. And we've also recently had a government commitment to an organic action plan with a modest amount of investment to help drive market development for organic produce. So I think this hopefully sets the scene well for an interesting discussion about best practice and experience from other parts of Europe. So, Thomas, I wonder to start with, if you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself and giving a little bit of background about who you are and your how you came to be an MSP. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. First of all, I'm an organic farmer from the very south of Austria. I'm running a mountain farm, mixed farm, mainly meadows, so livestock. We were breeding horses. We're having sheep and forest mainly, and I'm a professional beekeeper. And now, since 8 years, I'm a member of European Parliament and a member of Agriculture Committee. I'm the spokesperson for agriculture for the Greens here in the European Parliament, and I negotiate common agricultural policy the third time now. So that's what puts me in the eye of the agricultural typhoon. Yes.
Great, thank you, Thomas. So yeah, definitely well placed to give some insight here from Europe. So thanks again for joining us. The first question I wanted to ask was going back to Sam's point around the area of farmland in Scotland that's managed organically, and it is still very low at just over 2%. However, in Austria, more than a quarter of the utilised agricultural area, so total agricultural land in Austria, is managed organically. And there's been a huge amount of growth from around the mid-80s right through to the present time. What would you say have been the key drivers for that growth in organics in Austria?
Well, there have been many. I mean, it depends which aspect you want to put first. But from the farming side, we're still having relatively small structures in agriculture. So in my region, still, the average size of a farm is 20 hectares. And for many farmers, it was just an opportunity to stay on the farm, to be still able to earn a family income with less hectares, but more workload per hectare, because generally organic means more labor per hectare. And so you might still make a living with a smaller entity. That was one reason from the farming side. But I mean, the other side is the markets, and there the Austrian population is quite keen on eating high standard food, but also locally and homegrown food. So there's a general, let's say, perception of Austrian population that well, foodstuffs of highest quality is what people like to buy and like to eat. But I mean, if you see all the development, very much the combination of high quality agricultural goods and tourism was a driving factor, because Austria is a country that has a lot of tourism and welcomes approximately 80 million guests a year, and we're known as a country that cooks well, but also that serves a lot of local food, but also locally sourced food. And we're known as a country that puts a lot of emphasis on very high quality food. So people like to come to our country not just for the landscape or for cultural experience, but also for the good food, which is actually the most rated, highest rated reasoning why people actually come to Austria and not maybe go to other countries that also offer mountains or ski resorts or cultural experiences. Also, the supermarket chains that joined the movement at a certain point. I mean, this is a bit of a coin with two sides, but the fact that supermarkets were actively engaging into upscaling organic processing, production, and into direct cooperation with the farming sector was also helpful. And maybe last but not least, based on all these ingredients and all these factors, the fact that we have a public procurement that is also giving a strong focus on locally sourced foodstuffs and also gives room for organic,
Mhm.
and an export strategy that also works well.
Yes, that's great. It ticks a lot of boxes there, and it's interesting to hear you mention both the involvement of the supermarkets, but also other elements like public procurement, which is something that's often discussed here in Scotland. And I wonder on that front, was there any kind of specific target set for the quantities of organic ingredients in public procurement, or was there a specific policy around that?
Yes, but we as Germany on a bigger scale, we also have this kind of federal structure of lenders.
Mhm.
So there's different approaches in different regions of Austria, basically. But generally, public procurement is open and has actively engaged into not just locally sourced foodstuff, but also organically produced foodstuff. And I mean, it's also related to the landscape of Austria, and that would be actually also an argument for Scotland, because
Mhm.
big parts of our agriculture is based on grazing, basically. Because
Mhm.
in mountainous regions, first of all, the climatic conditions just offer a relatively short vegetation period. Secondly, the landscape is we have very steep areas, mountainous areas. You can't plant crops there. You can't plant
Mhm.
vegetables. You can't do fruits. So what stays is livestock, is milk production, is agricultural production based on meadows and on grazing and on hay and silage and so on. So basically on what we have. And there, the difference between conventional farming in the mountainous areas or in areas with restricted possibilities to grow other stuffs. There, the difference between organic farming and conventional farming is not that big. So
Mhm.
it's a small step also for livestock farms that base their production on grazing and greenlands and so
Mhm.
on. It's a small step into organic also. So that was also helpful. It was much more difficult to change fruit production and vegetable production and crop production towards organic, or even like pork or chicken. So these were developments that followed later. The main driver in Austria is milk, cheese, and meat, basically from mountainous farms when it comes to the organic sector. Meanwhile, all sectors are flourishing, but that these developments came after.
Yeah, that's a really interesting parallel because you're right that in Scotland, more than three-quarters of our agricultural land is classed as the less favoured area. It's rough grazing, it's upland, so lots of sheep farming and some beef farming as well. So there's definitely parallels there. And as you say, the shift required perhaps is not as big for those farming conventionally to consider conversion to organic. That's really interesting. I wondered if we could go back to the market. So organic food has a 11.6% retail market share in Austria compared to less than 2%. So it's 1.6% in the UK as a whole. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the key to engaging consumers? And you also mentioned the supermarkets. So how did you get, or how did the organic sector get the supermarkets to the table and start to engage in these conversations about, really critical elements like processing and that sort of thing?
I mean, there were some pioneers, yeah, Mr. Vlašek from supermarket chain called Billa, who were in an early stage realized that this is just an additional, positive image of their retailer, and in the competition that we have on the market, supermarkets are looking for add-ons, if you want, so, or for some kind of marketable or advertisable content that differentiates them from others. But again, it's very much based on this general narrative in Austria that we just like to eat good food, and we managed to establish organic as the highest quality that you can get. So it's less an ideological debate in our country. We by far not all organic farmers are voting for progressive parties or for green parties. Yeah, just to put this in this context. So you can be very conservative or even right wing in Austria and still run an organic farm because you believe that this is a good way to treat your soil, to treat your country, and to treat your people. Because we don't use toxic pesticides in organic agriculture, at least not heavily toxic pesticides. We try to, use no toxic substances at all, so you don't have residues. But it's also an aspect that was the main driver, was to acknowledge that organic is delivering a lot of public goods. And that's also, and we like our country, we like our clean water that is drinkable. If you open a tap, wherever in Austria you get highest quality drinking water, we like that. We're aware that this is related to agriculture. Also, animal welfare stuff. Many of Austrians still have relations to the countryside. Many of Austrian even city inhabitants still, know from grandma or from auntie, or they go for Eastern to their family to search the Eastern eggs somewhere in the garden. So there's a lot of direct relation to the country and to the countryside and to the farmers in the countryside. So that helped a lot. I mean, the downside of retailers and supermarket chains being so proactive in that sector is that they basically saw the opportunity to take over the whole market. So they were basically, only in the beginning they were accepting produce and products from organic processes, and piece by piece they were taking over the processing as well. So now I would say 90% of the organic food stuff you find in supermarkets is under their own labels, which has also destroyed a lot of local processes, smaller cheesemakers, bakeries, and you name it. So this is a bit the downside also. They have also used and are also, I would even say, abusing their position in the market to, make this kind of extra stash on basically producing it and processing it by themselves. But still, at the end of the day, for me, every hectare that is run in an organic way is an advantage for climate. It's an advantage for biodiversity. It's an advantage for our good soils. It's an advantage for consumers' health, and it's an advantage because it's locally produced, and the value chain is a short one, and the revenues stay in the country. So yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wonder if we could pick up on that and think about to what degree the growth in organic farming, not just in Austria, but across Europe, is driven by concern about climate change and about nature loss, as you just mentioned, and whether organic should be, or at least growing the organic sector, should be framed much more as part of a solution to changing climate. And perhaps that already has been the case in Europe.
Yeah, the climate nexus was an argument, but less for the farmers, more for consumers.
Right.
More than that, it's this kind of nature protection narrative. because we love our country and we love our nature. And it became quite clear at an early stage that organic farming is the way farming, the farming technique that respects nature most. So it's more that narrative. And today it's very much also driven by a security narrative. Because, I mean, I'm as an organic farmer, I'm able to produce foodstuffs and products out of, water and sun and air, yeah, basically, and what I produce on my farm, while my colleagues are dependent on imports of artificial fertilizer, on imports of pesticides. I mean, the pesticides are also quite costly, so there's also this security narrative, so we can do it by ourselves. We're not dependent on volatile markets. And I mean, if you see what's happening now, once again, this is a very strong motivation also for citizens actually to support organic agriculture, because this is kind of understood. So this narrative of are we able to supply ourselves with food, not maybe not with everything, but with as much as possible. This is also a strong narrative in Austria, so that helps.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because what we often hear in this country, particularly from the farming unions, is that they talk about food security, which I think most people agree is something that we should be thinking about and aspiring towards. However, their definition of food security is more about maintaining existing production systems and the support that comes from government for those. And I think that part of the conversation now around resilience is not just about adapting to what's coming with the changing climate and some of these geopolitical events that you've alluded to and the impact that has, but it's about becoming less dependent on those volatile inputs. For example, the nitrogen-based fertilizers that our conventional farming system in Scotland is very much reliant upon, but increasingly we're seeing huge spikes in prices, which can have a real impact on those farms.
In relation to your question to
Yeah.
climate, what I have to say is climate protection
Mm-hmm.
is a motivation for a part of the population, but
Mm-hmm.
climate resilience is the much more prominent topic in the
Mm-hmm.
moment. We've had situations of droughts. This is something Austria is not used to. And then you saw pictures in newspapers where you saw, well, a cornfield next to another, one being organic since 25 years. The other one ran in a conventional way with artificial fertilizers and so on. And in the drought, the conventional one, the corn was simply dead, while the organic one, right next to it, right next to each other, was still alive. I mean, you could see the stress, the heat stress and the drought stress, but it was still alive and there was still a harvest. The harvest was approximately a third less than
Mm-hmm.
usual, but there was still a relevant harvest, while
Yeah.
the conventional one was simply just dead. There was zero harvest, so big loss
Mm-hmm.
for the farmer. So it's these kind of pictures also
Mm-hmm.
on that this kind of the the ability of organic farming to be resilient and more, and also organic farms mostly are mixed farms,
Yeah.
meaning that the farmers don't put all their coins into one bag, so or on one produce, but they have three or four different things that they produce, and depending on the climate and depending on how the year goes, you always have some income, even though one culture might fail or one production might be under stress. Yeah, you still have an income. So this resilience also in
Mm.
climate crisis is a pretty big argument in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. And I think one of the things that we find with farmers who are looking to convert to organic is that they can see benefits, but it's quite information intensive to begin with. It's quite a big mindset shift often for farms to think about converting to organic. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of advice for farmers, about knowledge exchange between groups of farmers and training programs. And were these used in terms of government policy in Austria as the organic sector grew?
Yes, definitely. And there's a specificity of in Austria is that we're having a chamber of agriculture, or actually 9 chambers of agriculture. Every region has one, that is a public institution. where we have elected members. So we have farmers' parliaments that are elected every 4 years, meaning that actual farmers are co-deciding on the advisory services, but also on well, political legislation, basically. So they have the Chamber of Agriculture has a legal opportunity to raise their opinion in terms of lawmaking, so they can make themselves heard in the parliament. And through these structures, political discussions are very much influenced by the farmer's perspective. And as I said, for many farmers, this was not an ideological choice or a political choice, but rather a choice of survival. They realized that they might be able to maintain their farms, their family farms, while changing to organic. And this created a situation that, from a quite early stage on, the public advisory services by the Chamber of Agriculture, it's done by the Chamber of Agriculture, were actively engaging into, well, advising or supporting farmers also towards changing towards organic. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's the market at the end of the day that is the final economical driver, because you can have a lot of different motivations, but farmers want to survive on what they produce. They want to be able to feed their families, and so if they're not changing to organic just because they think it's the better way of farming, or they might even realize that this is the better way to hand over their land to the next generations. But you need to survive on the market. And that's why this public procurement point is a crucial one, because public procurement is the part of the market that we as legislators, or as state, if you want so, have in our hands. And this creates a stable demand. And you need a certain stability in demand if you want parts of your agricultural sector to transition into organic farming. And by public procurement, we were able to guarantee that. A second point next to the advisory services that are incredibly important, and is also the school system. So we have established a quite well-equipped school system for farmers. So our farmers today are pretty well educated, and also in the school system we were introducing also the option of organic farming. So you can actually do the whole courses and the whole schooling for organic farming, which creates very well educated organic farmers also that bring the abilities, because it's a different way of farming. Yeah, you need to have different skills as an organic farmer. Yeah, you need to understand more about the physiology of plants. You need to understand more on prevention, on early detection of pests or of fungus, because if you detect too late, you're doomed basically, because don't have these substances to just run over it. Yeah, and so the schooling system is enormously important as well, to have farmers that have the abilities to deal with the specificities of organic farming. Yeah?
Yeah, that's fascinating, that element of education. It's something we talk about a lot here in Scotland. And I was fortunate enough to do an organic farming master's degree course at college university here in Scotland, but that course has stopped now. And it's not just that higher level education, but also at a much younger age, that you need to be teaching
Yeah.
children really at that age about agriculture in general, about different approaches to farming. I think is really important. So it's
I was not talking about universities. We also have it on the university, but we have a schooling system in general, where with 14, 15, you decide whether you move towards high school, or you move towards basically getting educated in a profession like a carpenter, or for installations, or a car mechanic. So you don't need the high school. And so at this moment, so with 15, we're getting the kids from the farms into a schooling system where they get educated as organic farmers. So it's not even high school. You can even do your degrees there, and then go to university if you want to. But the majority of our farming kids are finalizing their education with 18, 19, and this is this time span, 15 to 19. where we have the specialized schools on farming also. And what I also forgot about is what is the specificity of in Austria is that farmers have we're quite liberal towards farmers, so farmers have a lot of possibilities for direct marketing,
Mm,
and this is also something that allows a lot of farmers and that allowed the sector also to prosper because we're allowed to sell on farmers markets. We're even allowed to knock doors and ask people whether they want to buy my potatoes. Nobody else is allowed to do that anymore.
mm,
We're allowed to also partly process our production on the farm. So we're allowed. I mean, sure, you need the installations, and this needs to be
mhm,
improved and so on. But you can produce sausages on your farm, or you can produce cheese on your farm, or I mean, I'm a beekeeper, and I can produce, I don't know, candles from beeswax. Yeah, that's allowed. That's quite liberal, and I can basically direct sell it. And today, what
mm,
performs very well is internet platforms, direct
yeah.
delivery systems, vegetable boxes that you get, or colleague of mine is running a homepage where you can buy a quarter of an organic pork, and if
Mhm,
the moment all 4 quarters are sold, the pork is getting slaughtered and then delivered in a cooling box. Yeah, so there's these kind of alternatives also that allow the pioneers also to prove that their business case
mhm,
is functional. And then it's getting upscaled, and then bigger
yeah.
processors, see, oh, that's really working, and there's a market, and we could chip in here. And so this kind of being relatively liberal to the farming sector also allows the front runners and the pioneers to
Mhm.
develop new business models and new models of production and delivery.
That's really interesting. Yeah, yeah. I wonder if we could just have a couple more questions, and I wonder if we could just touch briefly on policy because I mentioned at the top of this that Scotland has just announced that, or the Scottish government has just announced a new organic action plan for the next 3 years. And I know there's a European level action plan, but there's also been individual action plans at a member state level across most of the EU, I think. So I wonder if that's something that has been one of the tools for government in Austria, and if you have any thoughts about the role that those types of policies play in helping to develop the organic market.
Mm, I mean, strategies and plans is nice to have, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, these are not the drivers of the development and never were.
Mm,
And governments were basically following the market success and not the other way around.
mm. Right.
And I mean, yes, I mean, for many years they were totally underestimating the potential of organic, and when it finally performed well, they were all there, praising themselves for being so great. So it's not it's consumers, it's
Mhm,
advertisement. It's the awareness and the solidarity towards your country, also
mhm,
towards your farmers, because I mean, come on, I mean, it's farmers that are affected first and foremost by using
mhm,
pesticides. Yeah, it's the farmers' families and their landscapes that are getting
mhm,
poisoned in the first row. So it's more about that. So it's and proving that this is also a commercial business
mhm.
case. Yeah, and these were the drivers.
Yeah,
In our country. Yeah.
that's really interesting to hear. Um, I want to finish with a last question about Scotland in terms of our relationship with the EU. And you might be aware at the moment we're about to have an election here in Scotland for the Scottish Parliament, but there's also discussions between the UK government and the EU on closer alignment, coming back, for example, into alignment around things like food standards and phytosanitary standards, including the regulations for organic farming, actually. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on the benefits for a country like Scotland to be closely aligned with what's happening in Europe, um, and whether you see the potential for closer alignment in future.
I have to smile. I'm not really sure how to answer that question because I mean, first of all, we miss you here, yeah, and I mean, in generally, if in these times we don't understand that we will only perform together and we will only be able to defend our European way of life together in this global madhouse that we're in. I mean, and this is also what makes your government come closer again. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think even, I mean, behind closed doors, they're even, I mean, they're openly regretting that UK ever left. Yeah,
Mhm.
but who am I saying that to? I'm talking to a Scottish person. I mean, you never wanted to leave. You voted against leave. You were even thinking about leaving UK just to come back to the European Union. You know, Iceland is going to pick up negotiations again. There's going to be a referendum on that. Canada has been reaching out to us whether it is somehow thinkable that they join the European market. Yeah? So I mean, I guess UK will end up in a position like Switzerland or Norway.
Mhm.
So being aligned on fairly everything, but not being able to co-decide, which I think, okay, it's a bit poor. I would prefer that you sit around the table and co-decide on our common destiny and don't just are not just in a situation that you have to apply what we decide here. Yeah?
Mhm.
So, but you know, I mean, our markets are closely interlinked. We've seen the market damages, the economic losses by artificially trying to break up what has been grown together and what is, yeah, heavily interlinked and interdependent also. And yeah, I mean, European Union is the much bigger market, so the harm, the damage was much bigger on your side, unfortunately. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's good that there's an understanding that this might not have been the best decision ever. But yeah, so I would say let's cooperate as much as possible. And if you ever manage to rethink your decision, I think you're more than welcome to rejoin and take your legitimate seats here. They're still there, actually. You know, they're
Yeah.
still waiting for you guys. Yeah.
Great. Well, Thomas, I think that's a lovely note for us to end on. It's been really great talking to you and hearing all about the experience in Austria. I think there's lots that we can learn here. It's been a really useful conversation. So thanks very much for your time.